Hi, I'm Ian Douglas from FlynnFurney, environmental consultants. So we were the project ecologists working as part of this conservation management plan for the Hill of Uisneach. Um, so our role is to kind of assess the ecological significance of the site and how obviously how that might intertwine with both the cultural significance and management of conservation on the site uh, in the future. Um, I suppose kind of a little bit of background to the site. So it's generally grassland interspersed with hedgerows, some small wetlands, um, and some small woods. Uh, the soil is very calcareous, so rich in lime, and that's one of the kind of defining features of the site. There's also a lot of kind of rocky outcrops around the site. So this kind of calcareous soil is usually uh, associated with a degree of species richness, and we did see a lot of that around the site. A lot of flowering plants, a lot more flowering plants that you might see than somewhere that is boggy or quite acidic. Um, the surrounding landscape then as well is generally grasslands approved for agriculture. So, and then with other areas of conifer plantation in between. So one of the main parts of the project that we did was we done a hedgerow appraisal. So the hedgerow appraisal system is created by the Heritage Council to standardise a method for assessing hedgerows and finding out what what management over the history of the hedgerow has led to its current condition, the, the, the current condition of its species at this time and the composition of its species, and also what historical significance the hedgerow might have. So the main things that we looked at was the historical significance of the hedgerow, the diversity of species within the hedgerow, so both the canopy level and then the shrub level, but then also the ground level species, and how it works within the landscape. So the connectivity with the sampled area of hedgerow to other natural and semi-natural areas. So if the hedgerow is a connection between, say, a nice bit of woodland on one end and a lake on the other end, it would have a higher degree of ecological value than if it was just a standalone bit of hedge in the middle of a field between two roads. Um, so uh, on the site, which is pretty big site, they had over 18 kilometers of hedgerow. So we didn't sample all 18 kilometers, fortunately enough, or we'd still be there. We took 16 sample sites created by random grid coordinates, and then within those sample sites, split them in two to get two 30-meter sample areas and sample those two 30-meter areas. Um, so on that area, over 10 kilometers of the sample site of the hedgerows on the site formed old parish boundaries or townland boundaries on the original OS maps, which are from around the 1830s. So this in itself will indicate that the hedgerow has been in situ since at least that time, but owing to the history of the site, it's likely that a hedgerow has stood for even longer. Um, so this means that you have had a continuum of time for the species within that hedgerow to amass and to procreate and to succeed each other. So so that indicates that it's somewhat of a stable ecosystem within itself. Um, so then, as regards um, the significance of the hedgerows, hedgerows that score high within the hedgerow appraisal system are considered heritage hedgerows. So So on our site, we found that 55% of them considered heritage hedgerows on, as I was speaking about, the historical significance. But even if we remove the historical significance, it would still be over 50% of the hedgerows would be considered heritage hedgerows because of the diversity of species within the hedgerows. So within the tree layer and the canopy layer, it was quite low. Um, so it was mainly ash, elder, and some sycamore. This was kind of surprising in a sense that we weren't seeing more oak on other trees, but it might be potentially down to management or maybe people cutting out valuable trees. Where we were really seeing diversity was in the ground floor there. Um, so our best sample area had 25 ground floor species, and that's not including grass species. And if we included grass, it would be many more again. Um, so that was mainly things like violet and dog rose. Um, we also had primrose and cowslips. But if we had came back now at this time of year at the end of the summer, we probably could have counted even more species that weren't even up or were only just showing their first leaves at the time of the survey. Um, I suppose some of the reasons that we have such a rich ground floor layer is, as I said, that continuum of time to allow the hedgerows to be developed and to be undisturbed, but also varying degrees of light and varying degrees of of heat and also the aspect as well. So one of the things we noticed with a lot of the heritage hedgerows is that they contained a lot of stone in the ground layer, which has obviously been cleared over history to make room for more improvements in the grassland. So this created kind of a little microclimates in themselves and little niches and little holes, obviously ideal little holes for mammals and other insects. But also these stones may hold a lot of heat and may create a bit of heat down in the base, and this could again be influencing the range of flora that we have. Um, so I suppose what's the importance of these really rich hedgerows? Um, well, on a site like this, and in most intense or semi-intense agricultural landscapes, hedgerows are both a refuge for plants and animals that would otherwise be grazed or stamped or removed by animals or by machinery. Um, and as such, then they become a refuge or a haven for all the the invertebrates that live on them, the diatrous feeders that break them down, and then the higher things like mammals and birds and bats that will again feed on the invertebrates. But then something like bats, say, or birds, will use them as corridors to move through the landscape. Um, Either between protected areas or to either in and of themselves for feeding and for navigation through the landscape. Um, so I suppose one thing that affects these hedgerows going forward, and I suppose the conservation management plan needs to be cognizant of them, is how they're managed. Um, if traditional hedgerow management would have involved a series, something called laying. So the tree would have been cut at the base and then laid over like that, but it wouldn't be cut through. It would be just cut enough to lay it over, and it would survive. And the main stem would grow laterally, and then other side stems would grow up. But with mechanization of agriculture, it became more common to see hedge cutters, and they'll just kind of face the hedge. Um, and this is not a bad managed for the sides of roads, but it can be effective it can be very detrimental for wildlife because you're reducing the availability of the plant to produce flowers and to produce seeds and berries. So maybe the conservation management plan will potentially look to work with the farmer to allow some hedges to grow up and grow out, like the one here behind us. to maybe cut and tidy in some places, and there's maybe an opportunity to also practice traditional hedgerow management techniques. Um, yeah, I think that's about all I have to say on the hedgerows. Thank you very much to Westmeath County Council for having us be a part of such an interesting project. And now my friend and colleague Billy is going to talk to you a bit about the habitats on Uisneach.
Hi, how you doing? Billy Flint is my name. I'm an ecologist with FlynnFurney Environmental Consultants, and you've just been hearing from my colleague Ian on some of the hedgerow work that we did on the Hill of Uisneach. Just like to say first and foremost what a fascinating project this has been to work on. I'd heard lots about the Hill of Uisneach before we started working there, and I'd never had a chance to visit, and now I have, and I'm absolutely converted that this is such a wonderful site in terms of both not just what we study, the flora and the fauna, but also in terms of people, heritage, history and landscape. I was told when I got there that you could see 7 counties or something like that from the summit. We got there and there was much debate about which counties we could and couldn't see, but we did agree that you couldn't see Cork from there anyway, so that was at least we ruled out. So we wait to be updated on that. We studied quite a few different aspects of the site, and Ian talked you through the methodology and some of the results from our hedgerow survey. And the hedgerows, if you like, are almost like a network that passes through almost all of the island of Ireland and are extremely important. They're kind of like what we lack in woods in Ireland, we make up for in hedgerows. A lot of what I was doing was concentrating on 2 different habitat types. One was grassland and the other one was the Loch Lug, which was an extremely interesting part of the site for us. On the grasslands, first of all, in working in ecology, sometimes you have difficulty in getting people excited about grasslands, and I think that's because we're so used to seeing grass everywhere we go, just about anywhere in Ireland. Grass is actually what our economy was substantially built on, and a huge chunk of our economy still is. It's a kind of plant that you can see why people might not get too excited about it. It looks rather samey at first glance, but it is actually the raw material for so much of what this country does. And really, what it comes down to is the fact that when you cut grass like that, it carries on. It doesn't die. It doesn't stop growing. It keeps growing from the root. And if that weren't so, if that were like another plant that once you cut it from the top, it doesn't grow anymore, our whole economy would be different. We wouldn't have the landscape that we have. We wouldn't have the industry that we have. And chances are that Ireland would look entirely different. This little plant here and its many lookalikes have really shaped the landscape that we know today. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the landscape that we have so familiar and dear to our hearts and what makes us a green country in many respects isn't that diverse. It's not, what I mean is it's not that species rich. This little bit of land that we're on now has actually relatively few species. And this is true for much of the land that's farmed around Ireland. And this is a necessity, if you like, for the farmers, because they need to produce fodder for their animals. They need to produce silage. This is, you know, we need our milk, we need our beef industry and all the rest of it. So we necessarily have quite a species poor makeup, so that grass, which grows most vigorously and most intensively, will dominate. Now, that's not always true, and the sites where that isn't true tend to be the ones of higher importance in terms of ecology, in terms of species diversity. Now, species diversity, what we mean is the number of different species in any one space. Now, right here beside me, you can see there's in here, this isn't mown, this isn't cut, this isn't grazed, and in fact, this little bit in here is far more species rich. And you can see there's all the different shapes, and shapes is the first giveaway, and different heights. and these are plants which will grow to different levels. These are plants that will allow others to grow in among them. Look at things like this vetch, which is basically it's a mini pea, and this one here with many names, Smeradua in Irish, the blackberries that grow upon it. This is bramble, blackberry, or briar, whatever you'd like to call it. These are all doing different things from the grass, extracting different things from the soil, and giving different things back. And as Ian alluded to a little while ago, each of those things have different things that live upon them. And again, they will have things that will eat these little creatures, and it is thus far more diverse. So when you alter the way you manage your grass, if you alter the way that you manage the land where you have the grass, you're going to have species diversity straight away. And that's one of the reasons we were delighted to work on the Hill of Uisneach, because we got to see different approaches to management of grassland. We also got to see around the hill different aspects where they literally where the land faces in different directions, and as Ian said, areas where rocks had been left within some of the fields that are currently being grazed by animals, either for dairy or for beef. And so we actually got to see lots of little snapshots of how much more diverse some of these grassland areas can be, and we'll post up along with this. So we hope you'll be able to see some absolutely stunning species, which included orchids that are only there because the grassland is managed in a different way. They frankly won't exist in over 90% of Irish fields which are being used for agriculture. So if you like, the Hill of Uisneach is like a mound of different diversity, and it's also a mound of different colours, and it's which was really appreciated by us. We got the opportunity. We're spoiled. We get to go out and do these things, and this, we call this work. But we got to see the hill in May and in June at absolutely great times for the flowering of these plants. And they don't flower an awfully long time, but when they flower is really important, because there are insects that have evolved alongside them who will feed upon the plants, and who will pollinate some of these plants, and will go on, and they will in turn be in time they in turn will be food for other things. And this is how a more diverse grassland can be managed. So why is any of this important? Well, you if you've been keeping an eye on the news, or even half an ear on it, you'll have heard people saying things like biodiversity crisis, and you'll have heard of groups like Extinction Rebellion, and the various movements, not just in Ireland, but around the world. We are suffering unprecedented and quite alarming biodiversity loss. And one of the very obvious reasons is in Ireland for this is our use of land for agriculture. But what we saw on the Hill of Uisneach was ways where land can be managed effectively and in a reasonably traditional manner, and that allow great diversity. And it didn't appear to be in great conflict. And we were lucky enough to talk to landowners and Ian especially, and to discuss various ways that this could be not just maintained but also enhanced. So the outcome of this project, we would hope, will be a sort of a hand-in-hand approach whereby with some advice from archaeologists and the local authorities, heritage officer, and from ourselves, that these farmers who who are doing a fantastic job at maintaining hedgerows and grasslands and wetlands, which I may get to in a second. Um, they they will be able to continue this. One of the surprises that we came upon on the Hill of Uisneach was that there were numerous wetland habitats, and I got to say I wasn't expecting that, and some of them aren't actually shown on some of the maps that we got to study, and we found areas that had been maintained as naturally occurring wetlands, and even enhanced a little bit to allow them to stay wet for allowing cattle to drink from them. And this has actually meant that very diverse wetland habitats exist quite high up, which is unusual, because the water rolls downhill, so you tend to associate low wetland areas with more low-lying areas. But here on the hill, there are some truly lovely wetland areas which people are allowed to see when they visit the Hill of Uisneach. And probably the most fascinating of those was Loch Lug, which is connected with so many legends. It's up close to the summit of the hill, and we would recommend that you go and see. It's very small. It's 0.3 hectares, and it's an example of how a wetland develops and changes over time. And you can actually see different types of vegetation. You don't have to be a botanist or an ecologist to recognize any of these. You'll actually see how the wetland moves over time when water from below, water from above fills the area. It's like a basin up close to the top of the hill. It's a lovely area, and there are some really lovely plants there. So we'll be taking advice from the landowners there and getting their input on how they've managed it so far, and we might be giving some advice on how they could manage that wetland area in terms of keeping it, the best way of keeping it intact, because wetland areas are quite sensitive, but basically the best way of keeping it how it has been, so that to allow what's there today. And that's really, I suppose, the beauty of this project, is that we're looking at something that has taken literally hundreds and hundreds of years to arrive at what it is, and what it's arrived at is actually really good. So what we're looking at is to conserve, to protect, maybe to enhance, but overall to appreciate. Thank you very much.